I'll let him in before I start talking. Go upstairs, let him tag. Hello, everybody. So it's getting close to the end now. I guess this technically starts module 7. Although module 6, I consider a little bit more important. That's the GUI stuff. So I'm going to spend some extra time on that. If we need to push back the module 7 stuff, I don't mind that because that's kind of a lecture. And then week 8, there's not really anything but the final exam. So I guess it's a little bit of wiggle room there at the end. So I wanted to cover the graphical user interface stuff a little in detail because that is that's kind of important for modern software, right? We typically, when we say tell somebody to install a piece of software, we're not talking about something they're going to use for the command prompt or a bash terminal. They're going to install something and have buttons to click around on. So I want to make sure and cover that. And then the object-oriented stuff, it's kind of the introduction at this level. The 200 level classes dig into that a lot deeper. It just gets introduced. So it's only about an hour and a half of lecture on that anyway. So that might end up pushing back the homework on that, which isn't really a problem. Just if the date on module 7 homework gets pushed back, probably want to do that before the final exam. Because obviously there's going to be, it's a cumulative final. It's a cumulative subject, so it's kind of hard to avoid cumulative finals in a subject like this where everything builds on the previous stuff. So you'll just want to get it done before probably before taking the final exam. But we should have plenty of time for that. On another note, next Monday, the 6th, there might be a couple people pop their heads in the classroom, visitors. I'm not sure if they're going to come or not. I just told them feel free to. There's I guess a training session for the Learn Anywhere blended face-to-face for the new sort of classroom, what we have going on here. Ours is listed as blended, but I've pretty much been treating it as the Learn Anywhere situation. Some people on Zoom, some people here in the classroom. That's what's been mostly the Learn Anywhere situation. And one of the training sessions for that is at the same time as our class. It's right down the hall. So for some of the people that haven't taught a class like this, might be worried about it or something, I told them to feel free and pop your heads in my classroom or down the hall and see what it's like. Everything seems to flow smooth. Some people in the room, some people on Zoom, and all of us are kind of used to both of them at this point. So everything flows smoothly. So I sent out the invitation, told them that if they want to during that session, they can pop their heads in and kind of see what it's like. See that it runs that it still runs smoothly. It's not anything to worry about, I guess. I don't know if anybody's gonna do that or not. I just thought to let y'all know. Let's see, my push back the homework. Visitors on GUI. And next thing on the list, I want to finish up what we were looking at the other day. Is graphical user interfaces are kind of important for modern software. So I'll look at that. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? I see heads shaking no here, and I assume the silence means done. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. So along with that, kind of looking at the graphical user interface the other day, one of the things we ran out of time for was I wanted to make sure and look up stuff in that PDF I sent out. That's become sort of the premier documentation for the TK interface package. Even though it wasn't official documentation, it was something put together by a teacher because he wasn't happy with the official documentation. The interface package itself was developed between 1987 and 1989. So the documentation back then was a lot of handwritten stuff. Perhaps some of it never made it into the computer, but there wasn't really good documentation for it. So a teacher put together some on his own. I already shared that PDF with you. I wanted to make sure and look up stuff on that and go over how to read it. Because it takes a minute to read it. It's not as clear cut as, say, a tutorial. Okay? tutorials are generally put together, well, like the name implies, tutorial. It's designed to accentuate what you know. Right? Tutorials go on top of a lesson, refine the knowledge. It's not the entire lesson itself. So they're very focused and might skim over some parts, and maybe try to simplify other parts too much. But that documentation, it might not be the easiest thing to read. You get used to the way the guy notates it very quickly. He's very consistent, so you just need to see a couple examples of it, then get used to it. But it very quickly became the official documentation. And the other day, we also looked at GitHub, a very popular code repository, a place where we can refer to our code. I'm gonna delete that. So since we looked at that, I made it a point to go ahead and delete all the files relating to this from my computer, which is sort of what we do with repositories, so that we can go there and just grab the files that we uploaded the other day. Which can also be a good idea when you're working and keeping stuff on the repository. Not the best idea to keep a local copy around, because then you might end up with extra changes somewhere. You can, or obviously there's lots of different ways to get the same result, but I usually, once it's uploaded on the repository, I like to get rid of local versions. That way I don't get confused about which one's which. Unless it's some project that, like when I go to bed at night, I know I'm going to start working on it first thing in the morning again. Those might as well keep local versions. So on GitHub, we looked at setting up, once we have an account set up, creating a repository, some of the basic parts of it. Once it loads, seems to be running really slow. And we have all our files, the README files, licenses. There's some telemetry data about it, usage data, how often it's being used, looked at, stuff like that. We saw the add file button. We can either create stuff here, or usually we're going to work on stuff in a nice IDE and then upload it when we're ready to save the next steps. And we tend to do that as pull request, where we can, some of the issues. I said 2 of those. Oh, yeah. I was talking about issues. I was expecting that number to only say 1. But when we upload stuff, we create multiple branches. And then when we're ready to bring the working version over to the main branch, sort of like think of it as branches and trunks of a tree, we're ready to make that branch, a little side thing, the main part of the tree. We issue a pull request to combine our different branches. And we can see all the changes and stuff. There's the README. We also quickly looked at how there's places to put a website, regular website, to host our documentation for our project. So we can do that as a normal HTML page instead of a text-based README file or comments in the code. You can make it look nice like a web page and have something set up for that. And when we look at objects next week, I can go ahead and look at the auto-generated code, probably Doxygen. That's a very useful one. It knows lots of languages, and it's open so we can remap languages to it. It's originally from C++, but people just kept adding and adding and adding and adding to it. So it's very rare that you will work in a programming language that one already isn't familiar with. And then we can put a few special things in our comments of our code, and it will generate an entire website from it. We'll see that when we look at objects next week. A very useful one, and Doxygen is a good one for lots of different languages, which is extra useful because Well, in classrooms, we usually focus on the language, but in the real world, we tend to mix and match our languages and optimize what we get from each one. But we're looking at GitHub, sort of back up, have our code saved on here. Whenever we're ready for it, the big green button says code. There's a link here. I went back and forth a couple times. I decided not to do the whole automated thing for the introduction level, but we could get that link and just refer to the code here on the repository instead of downloading it, or use a terminal to just create a temporary folder on our desktops or on our computers that is actually this, really just links to this stuff and work on it locally. So there's a lot of extra features. We have the links right there that we can get to it. Or open with GitHub desktop. They also make us their own custom terminal. It started as a bash terminal. It's just a customized bash terminal. You can think of it that way. And there's also this, you can just download a zip file. I decided for the introduction level, I went back and forth a couple times and finally decided, yeah, it's probably best just to download the bash file, or sorry, download the zip file and work on it sort of like locally and then upload it when we're done. All right, so I have that downloaded. I'll go ahead and close out GitHub, come back over here. Oh, yeah, this. Which is a zip folder, so we have to dig the files back out of this. To work on it, I guess I don't really need the license or readme, so I'm just going to grab this and move that over to my delete folder. Which obviously there wouldn't be any trouble at all working right there in the downloads folder if you prefer to do that. I just always keep on all of my machines. I have a folder that's set up for the same directory path and everything that I always use as my working folder. And then every couple days, I just either empty stuff out of it or move the important stuff somewhere else. But there's the pictures. Those were actually from a different project, but there was a big green plus sign and a red X, so it looked like it would work for the simple classroom example. And I'm going to use Spider again instead of just a text editor. And right back to where we were the other day before loading everything up on GitHub, just sort of as a backup, but a repository is more than just a backup. Right? We could import this import command right here. We can import stuff from GitHub. That's what that link is. That link that it was trying to give us, which was, you saw, was ranked higher than the download a zip file button was. But I decided not to do that for introduction. So where were we the other day? We started setting up the standard appearance for a GUI. And it's not something that would make your program crash. Right? You could set up your GUI all kinds of ways. You know, I've probably seen a number of interfaces that are a long ways from that standard appearance. The thing about the standard appearance is users will already be somewhat comfortable with it the first time they look at your software. I think you all have probably experienced that yourselves. You download, trying something new, go to check the blogs, find a 10 best, 15 best list, and you start going through that list, checking them out. And you're only going to give it a few seconds, right? You're going to install something, open it up. If you don't like the look of the interface, you're going to close it and go somewhere else. So standard appearance can be very helpful there because people, when they see it, they know what, kind of know what to do with it. And the TK interface package, even though it was developed much later, they did kind of go backwards, and it's mostly styled with CSS anymore, cascading style sheets. which a whole lot of our graphical user interface packages are. That is listed as a standard somewhere. There is no standard on GUIs. We can do whatever we want. The typical appearance is just kind of a good idea. I highly recommend it. That's why I wanted to cover everything. Users will be comfortable with it as soon as they see it. There's not a standard for that. However, with websites, HTML5, 5.1 now, there is a standard on how to style and lay that out. Cascading style sheets. And since there is a standard there, anybody learning programming is going to have to learn that standard because there is a standard in that place. So might as well apply that standards elsewhere. So most of our graphical user interface packages do accept CSS, even if they have alternative ways to style them, which obviously this does because the TK package far predates cascading style sheets. TK was put together before there was even the debate on cascading or bubble. And that debate went on for 20 years before the standard, almost 20 years before the standard was finally implemented. So it predates it, but it was worth people's time to add it in there. And most of our stuff is with CSS. So when you take that class, the HTML CSS class, keep that in mind. It's not just for web pages. Since that place is a standard that all programmers are gonna have to know it, we've worked that in elsewhere. We just kind of did this basic setup, kind of got it started. Put a couple buttons in here, haven't got to the main content yet. Probably want some more menu stuff going. Well, we can look here on Spider. Usually there's at least 3 we can count on every piece of software, right? Right at off the bat, is the file menu. We expect to see that there. And that's usually the first place people look. If you don't know what to do with a new piece of software, go to the file menu and see whether the top button is new file or new project or new something. Like what is the top button in file menu? Because that's the starting point. Which is going to be unique for everything. So we're just going to put a random button there, but that can easily be changed later. We almost always have to see an edit button right next to it. And it might be a little ways down, but there's pretty much always a view button as well. So for a template, I was thinking those 3 would be a good start. A file, edit, and view top level menu. And we already have one of those. We already have the file, so we should be able to copy and paste that to create the others really quick. So I'm going to start by adding the methods they're going to call. Define edit person, and it's going to be a method called from button clicks, so we will need to pass in an event. Remember when the first parameter, which when we see object-oriented stuff, that's going to alter slightly. I should say the first accessible parameter. Because when we specifically do object-oriented classes, the first parameter involves that. So in that case, the TK stuff becomes the second parameter is the event. But the automatic event, the first one we have a choice about has to be the event, and that makes it a handler. In this case, I don't know, for now, I'm just gonna print it to the status bar, display status, editing data coming soon. Just because I know I'm gonna need this method, I want to go ahead and mark it out. So putting something there. And then it's not a terrible idea to go ahead and put a comment to label the end of it. It's much more useful on closing curly braces. And if anybody's transferring to a 4-year school after this, particularly here locally and planning on transferring to IUS, when I was there, most of the department required you to put labels on every closing curly brace. Just a little comment to say what it goes with. But it's a really good idea anyway, because it's easy to lose that. And in Python, it also helps to keep track of where the indenting stops. Then also going to add a view button. But the only other button I had in mind was to delete a person, so I'll just stick that under view. I'll go ahead and kind of mark out the event that it's going to call. And for now, just a placeholder of changing the status bar. So that's a nice place to throw a label up. Deleting data coming soon, which I guess is a status. It's just coming soon is not a very good status. Delete person. And a couple of things, those closing curly braces, the way that's sort of spelled out, notice all those method names are going to be called are similar. You want to keep in mind that first thing we looked at the other day with graphical user interfaces or event-driven programming in general, those criticisms on the Wikipedia page, the excessively complex, error-prone. So things we can do to help with organization and try to deal with those issues before they start arising. Difficult to expand. Those issues are always going to be in place. So now that we have some methods to call, we can scroll down here to where our file menu is created. So here's the section to create a file menu. These 3 lines. So I'm going to copy that and paste it in twice and just switch that out to the other menus. So instead of this first one, MN file, that's something that would be, it's going to show on the screen. So I'm going to use Hungarian notation to show it on the screen. And then the variables that directly relate to it be camel case with the same word. So it would just be edit, I guess, in this case. And then the method as well is in Pascal case, just directly called edit or edit person. But the same word. That way we don't have to keep thinking of different words. And it helps with that organization thing. So I'm going to copy that and paste it here. And if you haven't noticed yet, in most of your text editors, you can just double click on a word, the variable names, reference names, method names, the things, one single word, and it'll highlight the words you want. And just double clicking on them makes copy and paste easy. And then in a nice IDE like Spider, we can click somewhere on the word we want to replace and see all the highlighting for it to make sure we get all of them. Okay, looks like there's not any more in there. And then in view menu, before I move on, the label on that, it's going to say edit instead of file. And we'll call that edit person method. And consistency in the naming is very, very helpful for that overly complex, hard to debug issue that we saw right off the bat. Then we have a view menu. So once again, I'll just copy that and paste it in to replace what it was copied from. Is that all of them? Come up here. I don't see any more highlighting of what was being copied. I don't really have a view method in mind for this example, so I just put the 3rd button there to delete the piece of data. I wasn't supposed to go to sleep yet. Anything else needs to change here? Oh, and that's going to be called the view menu. So that's what I was trying to set up with this example. Hopefully you're kind of following along so that we get all of our stuff kind of in a copy and paste format. Which one's missing? Oh, this one's not edit menu. I'm going to add that to the main menu. I changed one too many. The edit menu gets added to the main menu. It doesn't get added to itself. But machines are fine with recursion, so you notice it didn't throw an error or anything when I said add that menu to itself. If it would have shown anywhere, it probably would have locked up the computer because it was just a recursive call with no stop. It would just kept adding that menu to itself over and over again. The spam sort of things. See, that's all it takes to get those other menus in there. Copy and paste, and then to fill them up with other commands, just add more of that add command line for whatever you want to do and the different methods to call. So copy and paste to build it up right from that. Really straightforward. Our button's kind of the same way. So it looks like, so this sets up our tab bar. Then since we have to load in the image and then resize it, which could be done in one line, we just saved that loading it in and then called that for .sub image. Could do that in one line. I just decided to do it in two since this file was designed to be an example. I'm trying to make sure the example is clear. Then we put that image on the button, and then we set up find our event to create the listener. Find it to a button click. So for our other buttons, we'll do the same thing 2 more times. Paste, paste, and then just change those names out. So that's pretty much from this template. That's pretty much what you'll be doing for your final project. Once you get all the methods together for that, you'll just set up the buttons and menus and things to call it from here. Let's see, what do we need? The other. And patterns and naming is nice. At the delete person. So this should probably be pick delete. Pick delete. Have delete person. So we have the same name going on everywhere. Copy that over here. Copy this name down here. And copy and paste is nice because the computer doesn't care if we spell it correct or not. If we make a typo, the computer will be perfectly fine with that. And call that other event. So just a little bit of changing once we get them in there. I guess the last one is the edit pick, which is the edit person .ping image. Split that up into a couple lines just for clarity. Oh, whoops, I missed one up here. Edit name refers to itself. The edit pick and Hungarian notation, since it's going to show on the screen for that consistency. It'll call the edit person method. And tab edit person. And Hungarian notation for what it is. I think that's all of them. So a bunch of copy and paste. It's consistent, right? We're not going to remake the button for every single one that we did. Once we make one of them, so you'll do that in general, right? You'll make one button, and then once that works, you'll copy and paste it and make those slight changes for the others. You're not going to start from scratch on every single button. And you probably want your buttons to look about the same and behave about the same. That way it's consistent for your piece of software. Uh-oh. What's that error message say? Couldn't open delete person.png. I'm going to name it remove person. Image 11. Oh, what did I do here? Here's my images. Add person, edit person, remove persons. Those are there. The add person was working. Did I forget to change something else? I call it delete person up here. Yeah. So really, I probably should have called that remove person. So that's what I already put in the picture. It should be fine now. If I can just figure out where that error is coming from. It doesn't seem to be pointing at anything in my code. That's not helpful. What's the other one? Not helpful. The original one worked, didn't it? Oh, that's not it. Um, I forgot what the comment symbol is. Does anybody remember what the comment symbol is in Spider? Is it?
I think it's hashtag. Sign.
Oh, I meant, there's a way to comment a bunch of them at once. Well, that was Alt 3. Oh, Alt 4. Alt 4 comment out a bunch of lines at once. This should be back to what was working earlier. Why did this stop working? And person in files right there. Okay. I have no idea why that stopped working. Oh, that's not it. So now I just commented that. And it. Control 1. I think that's what I just pushed. Okay, yeah. Control 1. I just did something else that definitely worked there, but something seems to be acting strange. Okay, it worked that time, but unlike the main menu, we still have to load those in the same way as the button. So one more step down here. You have the delete person button and the edit person button. So down here where we loaded that add person button in, we need a couple more of them, which again, we should be able to just copy. Copy, paste, and then just change what it is. maybe. And I apparently missed a spelling, so this is one of those things. The whole point of naming things consistently was to keep track of it, help with complexity. So before I get much further, I'm gonna go ahead and adjust those names. I was using TBD as a prefix for tab bar button. And that's what I did the other day. I forgot it this evening. So just change out the names, and then this one is something that happens a lot when programming. This is where I copy and paste those lines that look very, very similar, almost lined up. And it can be more productive to work down the columns than across the rows. So kind of like go down and change the names. Probably would have been better to change the names afterwards. So that way everything lines up even better. Let me go back to what so there's what it was when copy and paste. So if we go across, we have to think about what it's called, then think about where it goes, the two spots there, maybe issues with padding. Padding's probably going to be the same, but we have to change our mind the way we're thinking about it 3 times. What's it called? What row is it in? What column is it in? And then we come down to the next line. What's it called? What row is it in? What column is it in? And for every one of those lines, we have to change our mindset 3 times. So it can be a lot more productive to work down the column instead of across. It's kind of counterintuitive. We're used to the English language, but we only have to change our mindset 3 times overall instead of 3 times in every line. And we start over here on the right, and working backwards prevents things from moving. If we change stuff before it, the stuff at the end of the line might adjust. So if we start at the end of the line and work backwards, things should line up as we go down the columns. So first thing, all we have to do is think about where does it go. So first one's in column 0, column 1, column 2. And then the rows, I think in our case, 1 row will be okay. Just change the columns. And then we change our mindset once and think about what to rename it. So instead of add person, this one should be delete person. And then we go down, and instead of add person, this one should be edit person. If I can spell it correctly. That one throws people off at first, but it can make a big difference in productivity because that sort of thing happens a lot. And usually with more than 3 lines. Usually our toolbars have buttons look like this here in Spider, which would be a lot more than three lines that are almost all identical. You can see now we have our buttons in the menu just that quick. So the adding, well, stuff's just coming soon. But we can click on them and see it change. Editing, deleting, adding, and do a quick check on everything. Now we're probably ready for our main content. Do something different there. But you can see there's a lot of copy and paste involved. So main content, I want to set up some inputs for my generic classroom example working with data. Y'all have seen that a couple times. And another one that seems to throw people off with programming that really shouldn't is something that can be really, really useful. Step away from the computer and grab a piece of paper and sketch stuff out to help keep track of what you're wanting to do. All right, we're gonna make a GUI, so just draw a quick picture. We have the main menu, our file, edit, those buttons up there. Then we have our toolbar that's set up. Doesn't have to be a good picture, just to help you organize your idea. But for some reason, that always seems to throw people off when they're getting started. We sit there and do everything in their heads but there are other tools we have that can be useful, like a piece of paper or a board. If you have a board, it's really useful because it really will make your mind think differently about a problem. Looking at the board, this from over here, as opposed to walking over here and looking at it from this angle. We can't do that with a computer screen. Our computer screen's right there. So boards can be really, really useful. Then we have our status down here. So I was thinking maybe some text fields to enter our data, like name, age, and town. And then a menu to choose a favorite food, a drop-down option for that. So just a simple picture, doesn't have to be a nice thing. And we have all this room over here for displaying. I'm just going to write list box. So once we have our data, we can just set it up nicely in the list box, display it there. That way we can select items from it, go back in and edit or remove them, and all that. And maybe just to keep it organized, some sort of put it in resizable panels. That way we can adjust what we have to work with. So that makes a big difference. Oh yeah, and one of the requirements is to have a second menu, right? So one of these buttons, I guess, needs to pop out somewhere. I'll just do it over here. Some sort of editing thing, we'll figure out what goes there later. But just make sure that's covered in class, since it is a requirement for the project. And like always, there's lots of ways to do it. So I was thinking of showing you a really easy way to do it, but it may not be the best way. We should probably go with the correct way to do it instead of the quick, easy way that works. But we can set this up now. I'll start with this stuff over here, these input fields. Because our generic example had an input field and a label. So I can find it on here. So that's the buttons. Oh, and you may have noticed I like to set the code up in the same order. Obviously, the order of these instructions aren't super precise. We have to have the methods defined before we get to them, but we can mix and match that order because we don't load them onto the interface until the end. So one thing I've found that helps me organize it is set it up in the same way. Up at the top is all of that stuff for the top level menu. Then the menu, then the toolbar, then the main content, and then the status bar at the bottom. So that the code is kind of organized in the same way. Because that complexity issue definitely shows up. But you can see here, there's already a bunch of code. We're already up to 150 lines, and we haven't really done anything yet. It grows very large very quickly. So let's see, there's toolbar buttons. So here's our main frame. Prompt for user input. Probably change these. So instead of label question, I'm going to do that Control R thing again. And I'll use this as the first one. I'm going to change everything that says LBL question to LBL name. That's what showed up at the top of the picture. And hit the change all button. So I took care of that one. Now find the place again. There it is. Oh, and text name already lines up. So again, with the using different cases, the Hungarian case, we have this name data that we're gonna get for the little example here, but that's gonna happen in most software, right? For things like the text field where it goes and the label that tells the user what goes there are gonna line up. So using the Hungarian notation helps to keep that straight. That's already called text name, so that'll be good. So then I'll just copy that. Oops. Not drag that. Copy that. Oh, this label doesn't need to be a whole prompt. I'll just say name and make it look like a label for the box. Paste, paste. There's 3 of them. And then we can go down the columns again for copy and paste. Even though it's multiple lines, name, the next label is going to say text. Or the text is going to say age. I was looking at that word and talking and typing and doing 3 different things at once. Then the text one on the third field will say town. And then we don't have to constantly change our mindset about what we're doing. Change it, we'll set our mind, make all those changes at once, and then address the next one. All of them are going right in that FRM main, our frame there for the main frame. The entries, doesn't look like anything needs to change on those. They're all labels, entry boxes. So the last thing to change is instead of label name, it'll be label age and label and text age. Then label town and text town. So just something that can be a little bit more productive as we work, go down instead of across, which is definitely gonna take some practice to undo all the years of learning or to read and write in English or Spanish or French or whatever your native language is, and learning to read left to right, top to bottom. We can come down here and add those in the same way. Anything need to change? Row 0, column 0, row 0, column 1. That works. So the label is in 0, the text field, they're in the same row, label, and then the text field next to it. That sounds seems like it'll work. So I'll copy that, paste, paste, and then kind of come down. So column 0 and 1 is going to be the same on all of them. So we can go over to the row. There's 2 things in row 0, 2 things in row 1, 2 things in row 2, and then go over to the name. The name, the age, town, and town. Just a subtle thing about how ways to write your code, and that's just something I found over years of writing code that can be a lot more productive, a lot more useful than just knowing what words to type, how to approach typing them. And it just takes a little bit of forethought to get ready, like how many times, thinking ahead, sketching out a picture so you know how many times you're going to need to copy and paste. And that should have our thing ready for the next run. That button's in the wrong place. Better fix that. So that takes up row 1, 2, and 3. So our button's down to row 4 now. But there's something we want to do above it. So I'm actually going to move that down to row 5. And I don't need the output label that was there to begin with. Yeah, that'll be fine. I'll leave it in a moment. I left that off the picture. Let me stop screen share and add that on the picture. Because after we enter our data, might as well make another add button down here. It does the same thing as the call from our toolbar or the menu. What you're all used to in software, right? Lots of ways to do things. We don't have that one way restriction like we do in working in consoles and terminals. So there's still something to put above it. That's why I went ahead and moved that all the way down to 5 instead of 4. I guess systematically that's jumping ahead. Probably could put that in 4, but I don't think it'll cause a problem here. Yeah, row 4 is empty, so we just moved it down. Oh, whoops. Something is off. This should be a 2, which means the empty one needs to be row 3, and then 4 will have the button. Normal debugging stuff. Okay, that looks like it lined up a little bit better. And just some quick copy and paste. No need to type the same code twice. We know that initial input thing we had was working, so copying from that works. Maybe make that button bigger. So bigger isn't lining up. Let me put that back on the screen and grab my pen here. So all of our data stuff lined up nicely. It's that wide. The button's going to be in a row by itself. So it'd be kind of nice if that button was that wide as well. Just to make everything fill up the space evenly. So to do that, when we add it, another parameter that we often use is column span. So everything else took up 2 columns, so we'll just span across 2 columns. And then it'll, by the time it gets there, the computer has already figured out how wide a column needs to be. So we just say how many of them to go across. Although notice that just kind of centered it, which I guess could work. Might also want that fill or expand. What I use in my example here when I was getting ready. Somewhere way down here. Oh, I didn't do that. I think expand will work. Expand equals 1 or true. Oh, whoops. Expand. Sorry. A typo, but that word should seem familiar. Did I do that? I do fill here. Trying some of the ones I know. Hope it doesn't like that. Oh, and it's doing that one back there. This is part of the reason I've been using Spider. You notice on there on my screen, these pictures here. Let me move those up. If you look there at my screen, notice I have more than one console open. This can be very useful because sometimes things add up. It's loaded in new images every time. It keeps adding, and it suddenly got confused on the background stuff. So to clear that out, I have more than one console open, so I can just close that. And that is just an option in preferences. I can't remember exactly where it's at, but if you go to the tools and preferences, there is a checkbox to open in a new console. I'm guessing it's under interpreter somewhere. So our first guess is the interpreter. Nope, I don't see anything about where to run it. What about the run method? Ah, there we go. Run, and then instead of executing current console, execute in the dedicated console, and that will open a new one every time. So that if the computer starts to get confused in the background, you can just close out of that one without having to restart the IDE. You can just restart that small portion of the IDE. And then when I run it, it'll open a new console there to run that in. A little bit quicker than restarting the whole IDE. And most IDEs will have a feature like that. You're not restricted to only one console or terminal to run it. This time, I got a more useful error message. So it doesn't know what fill is. We column span, in, bad X, row span, or sticky. Might as well do sticky. Sticky is a useful one. It's just the word sticky, and then we give it a string for which side to stick to. And it's compass sides. So north is the top, south is the bottom, then east and west. And just pass in whichever side you want as a string. One letter, any of them from 1 to 4 letters. North, south, east, and west. I don't think the order matters. It might not like that order. And it got confused on images again. I'm not sure why that's happening. That's something in the background. So that's somewhere in my setup. If that's happening a lot and you're trying to debug something else, a good alternative would be to comment out all the stuff about pictures and just put words on those buttons until you get figure ready to come back to it. So, sticky, and then whichever side. North is the top, like a map, then south, and then east and west. So it's like looking at a map and just whichever letters you want it to stick to that side of. I wasn't going to show that, but that's probably a really useful one. So one more type of input to add. Also wanted to make sure there was a drop-down option. That was definitely on the list of things that I expect is going to show up in some people's projects. Choosing input from a list, not just entering the input, which is often a good idea. You should probably already be anticipating that one. Right? Just like we saw, probably showed up a couple times in the SDEV 120 class, showed up here as well. That we can't really trust the user to type the right string. If we told the user to type the word quit when they're finished, ready to exit the program, doesn't mean they're going to type the word quit or type the word quit correctly. They might type quite. And that's very, very close to quit. Or any number of typos, or try saying yes or no. There's no telling what the user might do. So one thing we can narrow down with is to restrict the options. Instead of a, there's got to be one here somewhere. Strange, I don't see any. Y'all know what drop-down menus look like. Instead of typing it in, we'll choose from a list. And to do that, we set up a list. So I'm going to make one called Fave Food and just fill it with some random data. The strings, it is still text entry, text input. So it needs to go into strings, or if you have a list of numbers, you'll want to convert those to a string. Into a particular thing, it actually needs to be a string var. We'll see that here in just a second. Hot wings. Cheeseburger. Or tacos. That looks like a good list. So a list of food to choose from. Probably want a longer list than that, but hopefully this is enough for the example. And then when we go to create it, that is called, and generically, you probably always heard that called drop-down menus. The term is context menu, but once again, the TK interface package was developed in 87 to 89. So it was one of the earliest ones. So it was before we'd settled into any words of that. So back then when they picked a name, or he picked a name, he called it an options menu. So come down here to where those inputs are, and I'll add one in. Just like before, add a label fave food. It's going to show, so the same name as the list we're choosing from, just in Hungarian notation to keep them connected yet separate. That'll be a tk.label. We saw that a couple times. It's going to go in our main form, and the text on it is going to say fave food. I need a semicolon in this one. And then the name he chose for it was options menu. And we need a special type of string to go on the interface. Our regular strings, that's ASCII code, Unicode, just the characters, right? If we're going to display it on an interface, we need a little bit more than just the characters. Like, what color is it? How big is it? The font size, font style, font family, all of that information. What color is it? So we have a little bit more than a string, but we still want to kind of keep it as a string. So I'm going to create another variable here to hold this so we can change it. In that TK library, we have something called a string var, a string variable. And I'm going to start it with an empty string. We could put in any sort of starter string, whatever you want to put there. I'm just going to leave a blank one, or maybe I'll say pick one. Because obviously, since it's a drop-down menu, the default option is what's going to show before the user chooses anything. So I'll say pick one, and then we can set up our menu. So our OM for option menu, fave food for that consistency, and that's going to be a TK option menu. Is it option or options? Option, no S. Oh, it's either predictive text found it already. And tells us what all we need. We don't need all that stuff. Delete all that. So the one thing we always have to put is where does it go? And we're going to load it in the main content, which is mainframe, our main frame widget. So frm main. And then the second one is the variable. That's the selected string. When they choose from that list, it's going to fill in that variable. So that's how we know what the option is. And it needs to be that string variable we just set up. Or any string variable, but if we created a new one here, we couldn't access it from elsewhere in our code. So we probably want to create that extra one so that it's accessible anywhere in our program. Has larger scope than just the arguments being passed in here. So our variable is OM chosen, the option menu chosen option, and then the value, or really we want the values or values. They were values and quarks. I wrote it on the board once earlier. We'll often see the words args and quarks. That's what he used when he developed Python. So that's what we tend to use the most. But what's really important there is the 1 asterisk or 2 asterisks. asterisks. Not sure what the plural of that is. But the one asterisk means we're passing in single values, fill in a single variable, or the two asterisks are where we fill in a list or a dictionary or a tuple or a set or a stack or any of our data structures. There's a lot more than the ones we saw here at the introduction level. You'll learn a few more in the 200 level class. And those continuing on a computer science degree, you will take an entire 16-week semester on data structures, and they will barely fit in. Those lectures where it's just writing down definitions in your notes as quickly as the teacher can spit them out. And goes very, very quickly. There are lots of ways that we can organize our data. So we want the quargs here, keyword arguments, which represents a whole list because we already set up a list and lined up our names. So the name matches this place we're putting it. We want what's in that fave food list. And now instead of typing in stuff, the user has to pick one of those options, restrict them to options. So I made sure that was on the list because a number of people's projects are going to fit that, right? From car loan applications to cross-stitch bill of materials applications. There's a lot of things that it's probably better to restrict them to that list. To sandwich ordering, a lot of different projects, but there's a lot of places where you will know the list when you're putting your code together of the choices they have. So you don't want to just leave it open for them. Cuts down on the user making a typo, I guess. Let's see, where's that going to go? Oh, and here's all those labels and entry methods. So we'll just add the next one down below it. Label fave food dot grid. We're up to row 3. Column 0 has the labels. Then option menu fave food also gets loaded in as a grid. Still on row 3. And this time we're in column 1. This is something that just came out. I've been doing it differently, but this is how I normally type these. So notice on the lines above, I went ahead and put a space there. I was doing that for clarity in the example. Normally, to help keep things organized, if I'm just filling a parameter, I do it with no spaces. And if I'm doing math, I put in the spaces. That helps me tell at a glance what's what. To kind of narrow down on stuff. You've been staring at the screen for hours and hours and hours, if that makes sense. Subtle differences. Like I know some parameters are going to have math done on them, and some parameters are just going to have value stuffed in there. So my own style of doing that is if I'm just shoving a value into that parameter, I do it with no spaces. And if I'm going to do math and calculate it right there, I do it with spaces to help find those when we come back to debug stuff. So obviously, if everything works, that doesn't matter. That's something that helps when debugging to kind of track down stuff. Now we should see that option list. Did it do that again? Let's see here. Let's say this now. String object has no attribute group. I'm gonna close that and rerun it. For some reason, it seems like the library's Python interpreter is getting confused on me repeatedly. But that would take a while to track down and figure out what's wrong. We'll switch that back to a blank string. Maybe it just doesn't like having the default value in there. Oh, now it's back to the image message. And whatever that is, it's in the background, so that'll take more time than I want to spend during class to track down and figure out what it is. But opening in new consoles is a quick way to fix that. There we go. So you can see we have that whole list in there now. Why'd that go in as one string? Did I forget some commas? Where's the list? Will this work? Okay, that did fix it. So remember how I was just saying something about the two asterisks? One asterisk, and when he created Python, he used the word args. That means a variable. Oh, look, some of y'all may have seen the wildcard selector before. We use that quite a bit. It just randomly fills stuff. That randomly fill stuff symbol. So when we have single values, it's one asterisk. And then what the keyword ones are actually doing, it's two asterisks, quarks. So we're going to fill stuff. So it's a wildcard of a wildcard. That makes sense. So we're going to randomly select from a random selection. So that's what the two asterisks mean. So feeding in a list, instead of specifying that parameter explicitly, I can keep the first asterisk there. So it's sort of the randomly select part, or select everything from, and then the second asterisk gets filled in. So you want to fill in the list that way to get line breaks. And that gives us a bunch of options to choose from. It's probably a good time to take a break. Alternatively to that asterisk thing, if that's confusing, remember you can always just pull it up in the help menu. What was the keyboard shortcut for that? Is it Control-I? Yeah. Inspire your your cursor there, hit Control-I, and see that that last one is called quarks or values. So you could just say asterisk values equals that. Because without that extra asterisk, it's trying to fill in the single value, not the list of things. That fills up this part. Now we need to make the button do something and give a place to show the data, which is going to follow suit. It's going to be very, very similar. So it's probably a good time for a break though. 10 minutes sound good to everybody? I see head nods in here.
Sounds good.
Yeah, about an hour and 15 minutes is, hour and 15 minutes is the traditional length of class before when things were 16 weeks, before moving to 8 weeks. So great time for a break. So 7:17, we will get back to it at 7:27. I'll see you all in a few minutes.